All right, guys, welcome back to the Self-Selecting Podcast. Thank you so much for the feedback I received on the last episode, episode 5. Really appreciate that. Tons of you tagged me on Instagram, sent me messages. I'm really glad that these moments of, I want to say vulnerability, but let's be real, like it is self-selected vulnerability. There we go. I'm glad they can help. That is probably one of the most rewarding parts of doing this, of putting out content, is knowing that on some level it makes a difference. And even if it's a small difference, even if it just gives you some food for thought or something to at least consider next time you are going through a very challenging part of, let's say, contest prep, your diet, post-show, whatever it might be. I'm really glad the episode on building and adjusting your expectations, I'm glad that was well received. So in this episode, what have I got for you? This episode I'm so excited for because one, it is my first time getting to be a host. First time getting to be a host. Jarring. Very, very different than being on, like, the role reversal was. You'll see. Eric Bugera, that is who we are sitting down and speaking with today. He is something else. He's a wizard. Let's just say that. In this episode, we go over the more frequent training offenses that we see. I think you're really going to like it. I know that the last couple episodes I've touched on just a few different nuggets that really irk me, and I think a lot of you guys can benefit from just hearing someone approach it in a very, like, lecture style. There's nothing I can add that Eric didn't add. The dude is on a whole other level. He truly is an asset to all of the companies, all the pies that he has his hands in. And I think that you guys are really going to like it. I hope that you're able to take away some actionable task items, or, very least considerations moving forward, whether that be for your own trading, or if you're working with a coach, if they have you on your a program and you're like, you know what, I think I have some questions. That's what I want you to do. I encourage you to start asking questions. Excited to share it with you guys. I hope you enjoy it. As always, links will be in the description below. All of Eric's information will be down there too. And yeah, let us know what you think. Leave a review, leave a comment, and enjoy. Is it weird for you to just hop on, like, particularly, like, we know each other a little bit now, but, like, for people that are like, hey, you want to come on, you've never spoken to them outside of just, like, texting, is it weird to just hop on and go directly into it?
Not really. Like, I've actually had, since I've started getting more into the space, with, I hesitate to say content creation because I'm speaking to an actual content creator. Um, I write things and post them to a now video based medium, I guess, Instagram. But no, it's been actually more frequently than I ever thought, where someone will approach me where I have actually never spoken to them before, just through the
Mm.
exposure through either Prescript or Barbend or anything. And I have an open profile. Reach out, contact, not a big deal. It's whatever. And I did one recently for, it was like a dance sort of, the category was like professional dance, and like it was
Mhm.
a clinician that was trying to help out professional dancers or people retiring from dance, kind of like fix whatever that shape of sport would have chronically done to their body. Like that was the kind of area of expertise.
Gotcha.
um, they brought me in because of resistance training and hypertrophy, which I'm trying to remember if it was, I think they found me through Barbend articles, which is wild. Um, but I had never spoken to this person at all. It was a follow and then a DM, and then that was the way it went. And we did like an hour and a half podcast on hypertrophy, and it's cool. Like, if we're gonna talk about like deep, dark, my history of like my childhood and like get into some serious topics, maybe we should be friends first. But if it's about like industry stuff, like, yeah, cool, well, whatever, we'll talk shop. This will be the way we break ice and maybe have those conversations later. Like, it's there we go.
Yeah. I feel like it's with the podcast I've done, I've had good experiences. And like, it feels a little jarring when you don't know the person, you don't know their energy, their vibe, like just demeanor. Um, it's only happened once where I got on and the energy was just shit. Like, I was like, this is gonna be a painful date. Like, that's what this is. And they actually surprised me and brought another person on that they're like, oh, you might know. I was like, I hate all of this. Like, I hate this so much.
I've certainly had those, from places I didn't anticipate. But again,
Hmm.
when most of your career now, like I'm lucky that I can navigate them really well. I can take feedback from the person. You're saying like the energy is kind of off or real first date energy. I can sort of shock absorb that really fast. I can read the room really
Mm,
fast and kind of chameleon to the kind of conversation or kind of personality type that I see in front of me. And thankfully, like just from the years of in-person training where you just get shotgunned new person after new person after new person, you kind of get the ability to feel it out and find that groove relatively quickly. But the
mm.
way you describe that, like first date energy, 100%. Akko, first date, there's been a handful of them where it's just like the most slow plodding. Did you have something prepared? No? Okay. Cause I
Yeah.
could YOLO for sure. We can do that. But I kind of need some direction as the person that was invited on.
Yeah, like, how did you see this going? Because the conversation, I mean, I always ask, I'm like, "Hey, is there something you wanna talk about?" Like, is there something specific in particularly with, like, the content I talk about? I'm like, "Do you wanna get into the patho? Do you want it to be more ambiguous? Do you not want me to talk about drugs?" Because some people are like, "Hey, we're trying to keep this on YouTube, so can we just, like, avoid the D word entirely?" And that's fine. I like to be somewhat prepared. Also, if they're going to ask me about a bunch of shit that I'm like, hey, I just frankly, I'm going to disappoint you. Like, I don't know enough about this to offer something of value. But I always appreciate being able to hop on and like talk to someone for even if it's like 5 minutes. I'm like, can we just, can everyone relax? Like, can we just calm down and then
Yeah.
dive in? But with you, I'm really excited to do this. You are actually going to be the first guest. This is going to be my first duo podcast, so I'm really excited. And I mean, I couldn't think of a better person to have on to introduce to my audience because, I've been trying to force you into the bikini realm for a couple months now, trying to drag
Yeah.
you in here. Uh, if for listeners who don't know who you are, aren't familiar with your work, I mean, I think it would be good to just start off, give them a basis of your background and tell them a little about yourself. What do you think?
These always evolve over time. Like as the career
Yeah.
evolves, you just like do the resume thing where it's like, okay, which is the least relevant thing that I can finally delete? Like my first actual job in life was McDonald's. And the day, actually, I'm pretty proud of that. It's weird. It's like at the arc of my pride in that gig because now knowing that I had my first gig at something like a fast food chain, like service industry level, oh, it taught me so much. As an adult now, I can reflect and be appreciative of that. But yeah, like so industry level experience. I have my master's degree of kinesiology as well as a double undergrad in kinesiology as well as nutritional sciences as well. So I started down the kinesiology path, became an in-person personal trainer for a couple years, went back to school to do the nutrition thing, and as I completed that, I realized that unless I went the full dietetics route, there wasn't a whole lot that I could feasibly incorporate into a business structure if I wanted to do it with the I don't want to say like the professionalism that I wanted to hold my business standard to. At least where I'm at, most of what I would do, like if it was going to be meal planning, real true nutritional counseling for potential clients, it's a pretty guarded, it's a pretty protected sort of area. Like you need to be licensed as a professional for most things, especially in the personal training realm, because I know a lot of people in the training space that you're in, and that technically I'm, I guess, now in sort of. It goes back and forth as to whether or not nutrition and meal planning is actually a protected thing. I think that blew up not long ago, where I was like, wait a second, a lot of certifications kind of go down that road for liability purposes for them, but really it's kind of regional. But either way, um, I am a personal trainer by trade. So combine those two things, most of the clientele base that I would run into, it's probably going to be a clinical level problem, which in most of those cases, regardless of where you are, you can't really touch on that unless you're a dietitian. So it taught me everything I'm doing is probably right, but you also can't use it on clients necessarily without the protected title or the distinction. So I finished that and was like, I don't know what I want to do when I grow up because I'm not done in school yet. I'm scared. I don't want to go back to
Mm,
work, but I kind of do, but I kind of don't. And that's when the professors sort of sunk their claws in and got me to do my master's degree. I ended up doing it in exercise immunology, and we combined that being my advisor's area of expertise with my topic of choice being blood flow restriction, which in those years it was really starting to blow up. Now it's pretty well established. People kind of understand what it is, but that's what I ended up doing. And then upon completion of that, went back into the industry and just basically picked up where I left off. I went back to being a personal trainer, just even more highly overqualified. Like, we're talking big box personal trainer with a master's degree and the experience that I was bringing, which sweet. My people are still there. I gravitate towards Gen Pop. I gravitate towards the average human that's just looking to improve themselves. They're lost along the way, right? All the way through that experience, we ran up into the COVID time period where box gyms started to get kind of shut down. And after the first series of lockdowns, it could be regional for how many you had to go through, but we did the first one here. We came back. I could kind of feel the inclination that it was going to happen again. And that's when with the encouragement of my wife, which I never saw coming, but when it happened, it was like, okay, full steam ahead then. We went fully into the independent online space. I quit the box gym. I established my own personal training sort of service online. And so since then, I've been doing fully remote, independent contracting work, which has diversified incredibly to the personal training slash more commonly termed programming, just online programming, everybody.
Mhm.
I do that a lot. I, through many opportunities that have been just sort of granted through networking and just experience, I now write for a company called Barbend, which is essentially taking what I have deemed their rationale for employing me. Let's take high level concepts and try to knowledge translate them to the average reader, the average listener, the average everybody. Because I feel as though that is one of my skills and one of my talents. So I write routinely fitness articles for them. And I'm also one of the most prominent, probably fixtures in my career right now is I work for a company called Prescript, which is it's a continued education company within the fitness space. So we offer a tremendous diversity now of fitness courses from applied functional anatomy, applied biomechanics is kind of like the cornerstone called Prescript Level 1, all the way to what I have constructed on their behalf and run myself, which is actually the hypertrophy course that they have brought out as of last year. So that's kind of like the short version of this wild ride.
You bring something to this space, and I mean, like, I love that you touched on it in that way as well, to the coaching world, but it is programming. And right now, I mean, like, it is widespread as far as what the background and, I guess, pedigree actually looks like. But something that really stood out to me is just your ability to sustain that in-person clientele despite going the online coaching route. Because I mean, yes, like, that's it's a lot easier to make a career that way um currently, and the barrier to entry is so low. And I mean, that's largely the conversations that we've had online have touched on why that is, and then how that affects both of our coaching businesses and experiences with the clients and the different types of problems that we run into. So, for listeners, like, I reached out to Eric recently. I was just like, hey, like, I want to hop on and talk shop, because oftentimes we're in the DMs going back and forth on things that we see that are just painful. And I think there's a strong overlap between our audiences who want to understand what it is they're doing, why they're doing it, and really why there's such a prevalence for so much shit just in programming out there online. Um, as you know, I haven't been through Prescript. Big fan of what you guys are doing. Part of the collective, just a lurker though. Don't even go to lab. I do not want to be called on. Not qualified to be called on, frankly. But uh, company as a whole, putting out a lot of good information. But Eric specifically, for listeners, I think you guys are hopefully really going to like this and be able to take away some of the nuggets that I've alluded to, or very very briefly touched on in the last couple episodes of this I don't know, this brand new podcast, I guess I'm officially calling it that now. But topic today, training mistakes. And I mean, like, this in itself is just such a huge spectrum. And I know you have some. I wrote down some of my own. Probably going to be some overlap. Definitely going to be some overlap. uh is there is there something that you would say overarching is just, I mean, globally, one of the biggest icks that you see in training currently?
There's two, because you and I are both on the internet and both on the Instagrams, and the prevalence of tribalism in fitness
Mm,
it's always kind of been there, obviously, but it's kind of interesting to see at least the corner of the algorithm that I've been placed in, and that's very important for listeners to understand. Like, you will be placed in an algorithmic formula based upon what you like, what you view, what you everything, and that's not the real world, and that's not how everybody in the fitness space thinks, and that's not how you have to think, assuming that you're trying to sort of formulate your own methodology and things that work for you. But the tribalism is wild, but that's kind of an aside. It feeds into the actual mistakes with respect to the fact that tribalism breeds the idea that there is one singular method that works. When the reality is, unfortunately, and this is the problem, everything works if you do things with enough volume and enough effort. That's something that I tapped on early in my tenure with Prescript. That is honestly part of the reason why I started to try to disentangle the hypertrophy space on their behalf. Was people will make posts. A lot of times there'll be memes, and it's super irritating for someone that has this more nuanced sort of. I attempt to have an all angles view of how these things work from a principles based standpoint, and that would be the major mistake that I was sort of leading into, is that people look for tribalism or methods, specific methods, as opposed to thinking on a principles based approach. Why are things working? This thing worked. Sweet. But why did it work? So that I can cross multiply and divide and add this in wherever I need it to go within my programming or a client's programming. I can call the shot that will work every time when it's right for the right person, as opposed to just funneling every single human to a singular choice. So the premise that in absence of quality, there is volume. That is something that I spoke to within Prescript as our community that has really resonated with people, because, like, you as a competitor know, uh, I helped a recent local competitor get mobilized again. They just trained themselves over, like, they got their pro card over a number of years, and over the run into getting their pro card, their coaching was fantastic for developing the physique necessary to get the pro card, but horrendous for allowing them to live a life that wasn't a brick. So they eventually came to me, and we've been work colleagues before, and we just spent literally like 3 or 4 sessions, completely unbricked them, and now they're able to return to training with all the intensity and really the coaching that whatever their coach wants to hand them, because I took a principles based approach to how their human body is supposed to move. But for you, when I say that, things like 4 sets of 25, 3 to 4 sets of 15. And don't get me wrong, I love a good set of 15, but in absence of good programming decisions, quality execution, true intensity, it's just slam, volume, 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 volume. The problem being is that it works. But why? That's the thing that people need to start questioning, so that they can not necessarily always have to go that route. That, if I were to give one broad, sweeping story like problem in the industry, it's probably that, not knowing why and not being driven by principle.
oh, mic drop. Okay. I really hope people are taking notes or are keen on taking notes now here on in, just because you're absolutely right. It works. And that's one of the bigger questions, more frequent questions that I get is, well, okay, well, if doing this much volume is incorrect, why does everyone do it? Why is there no one? And I mean, a large majority of my listeners, some competitors, some non-competitors, but generally on the bikini, maybe wellness side of things. So there is that overemphasis on a trillion imbalance in glute development as opposed to quad hamstring development as well as upper body. Why is no one doing it better? Why is no one doing it differently? And it's not because it's necessarily the right way or the best way. And I'm so excited for for you to shed some light on that, because truly I think it's something that when we dig into what these programs entail, I mean, we're fucking talking about like 60 sets a week of working sets. And I mean, I think even within that, like, I mean, volume, that was my number one. It was just globally. There is this idea that volume is the key to I hate how this is like even worded, but it's a thing right now. It's how you bikini build. It's how you build a bikini body that's like not dense. And it's like, okay, what the fuck? What is dense muscle as opposed to detailed muscle? Like, how are we discerning like projection as opposed to visibility in smaller muscles as opposed to larger ones? I think I think my next one was the quality of the working sets. And I forget like how I jotted it down, but just I would love for you to talk about how um how much of a gap there is between the perception of what a working set is, or even the perception of hitting wherever you need to be for that working set relative to intensity, relative to failure. And I guess what you see, can I call you a clinician? Is that the right terminology, or are
Mm,
you uncomfortable with
s-
that?
uh, Scientist. No, let's just go. I don't know what the proper thing would be. Definitely not a clinician. I was a scientist
Okay.
like 7 years ago for 30 seconds. I don't know. Person that has been educated, is done this a long time and critically thinks. I don't know what word that would be, but call it a guru. Let's go. Let's reclaim the guru
You know
title. I don't
what?
know.
Eric, yeah, Eric, the guru and the future bikini builder, uh, effective bikini builder. Yeah, that's what we're gonna go with.
My
Um,
resistance is just palpable on my face.
I'm gonna just keep pestering you. I'm just gonna keep throwing it at you, and then people are gonna understand why, hopefully, very soon here. But I am hoping that your email is flooded with bikini inquiries after this. Going back to working sets, I would love if you could expand on that and just like explain to listeners, hey, like what is currently being done in terms of what is laid out on their program in terms of this 4 sets of 25, and how different that actually looks from what you aim for your clients to perform at.
So I'm going to go around a couple analogies, a couple like hopefully clear images that will pop into people's minds that should really help clarify the why and the how behind it. Because simply just being like, "Oh, that's dumb." I hate when that happens. It's like a just straight counter pushback, like "That's dumb. Do it this way instead," without any clarification as to why one method may be applicable and one method maybe not. Because this is the thing, they're both applicable. It really comes down to the context and the actual like the client in front of you and what their needs happen to be. So, speaking in terms of, say, a true working set, muscle growth, to hopefully give a kind of condensed version of the how it works, you need to recruit the muscle, you need to stimulate the muscle. Recruitment of the muscle, contract it against resistance, let's go. There's a couple different types of muscle tissue. Type 1, which is more your endurance based fibers. Type 2A, which is more glycolytic, just so they're able to like sort of withstand a slightly higher repetition count, but they're still anaerobic. They still are going to be the ones that are stronger, more explosive, and so on and so forth than, say, the endurance based type. Then you have type 2X, which is the highest sort of threshold motor unit. It takes the greatest degree of intensity or necessity. That's a key word to sort of earmark, necessity, to actually recruit into action. Now, the way this works, it's called Henneman's size principle. There's an orderly recruitment of these motor units and their muscle fibers by virtue of need. So, how much load needs to be moved? How much fatigue have you accumulated that's going to maybe inhibit certain fibers or motor units from contributing, at least transiently, like in the moment? And a very helpful sort of mental analogy that I can give is if you've ever been to, so like a carnival, a fair, whatever, and they have that test of strength, like the big ass hammer that you hit with the target, and then it sends the light up the pole, or it sends a literal thing up a pole and hits a bell. The harder you hit it, the more likely you are to ring the bell because the thing goes all the way up the pole. Sweet. Either people understand that, or they're going to Google it and realize that I'm 100 years old and that's what happened back in my day. Um, but that's basically your motor unit recruitment. The harder you swing, the more you need to actually produce force, the higher likelihood of recruiting your type 2A and type 2X muscle fibers. And this is important because your type 2s are the ones that can actually elicit greater degrees of hypertrophy. They can be the ones that will actually grow greater levels of tissue that will be physique actually altering. Type 1 fibers, hypertrophy all the time, but they also are much higher turnover because they're endurance based. Think of running, think of posture, think of all these things you do a lot of, or walking. They're always in use, they're always turning over, but they're so worn and torn on the daily basis that you never see this huge appreciable amount of accretion of tissue. Type 2, that's the full send tissue. So if you full send and grow it, and then you encourage them to stay around by still training hard, at least every once in a while, those are the ones that are going to actually have a greater degree of hypertrophy just by virtue of being type 2, but also by that, a greater impact on your long-term physique development. Those are the ones you're trying to really target and grow over a long period of time. So these ultra high volume sets, these lower volume sets, these lower repetition sets, we have to recruit the fibers, we have to stimulate the fibers. Stimulation of the fibers effectively means giving a tissue a reason to grow. There's a concept called the specific adaptation to imposed or implied demand. So the SAID principle effectively helps dictate, okay, how is my body going to adapt? Well, what are we challenging it to do? And typically what you challenge it to do, if you get enough of intensity behind that challenge, it will then respond by building tissue, building maybe more durability, building absolute strength and coordination. It really comes down to the challenge that you're presenting that tissue. So in order to build muscle, we need to recruit the appropriate fiber types, being our type 2A, type 2X, so type 2 in general. In doing so, we need to also stimulate them. And to do that in a way that's going to promote more tissue, what would delineate strength from hypertrophy? Probably a nice middle range of repetitions or absolute volume performed. Because if we just went to absolute failure all the time, that's a good strong swing of that mallet that's going to send the light all the way up the pole. We basically did a 1RM. Well, that's a great challenge for coordination, for recruitment of everything you have all at once. But it doesn't necessarily provide the volume challenge, the commensurate level of like reps performed or volume performed on a day at a high level of effort. They would then be like, oh, fuck, I need more. Like if this shit happens again, like if I had to do one more rep, if I had to do one more set, I would probably fail way early. Like that, I hate actually anthropomorphizing the body like that. It's like what everybody does. But oh, I need blah blah. I hate doing that, but it makes sense, right? That's how
Mhm.
you can sort of delineate how much of an adaptation you'll get, maybe towards strength, maybe towards hypertrophy, even endurance, is how close you can take a set to failure, how many reps it takes to get there, and then on the grand scheme of things, how much you do per day. Fatigue versus stimulation, a ton of different concepts are kind of flying around right now. But effectively, to summarize again, growth of tissue, effective sets are the ones that are going to basically take you close to failure. There's arguments over how close you need to be. I would say, I think you said it in previous podcasts, anywhere from like 2 or less reps away from failure, you're probably in a good sweet spot right there because you're intense enough that your movement quality probably hasn't dropped too significantly, but you're close enough to failure that, again, the body has a necessity to actually improve, the improvement being more tissue. So these effective sets are going to be close enough to failure within a repetition range that promotes hypertrophy the most. Close enough to failure recruits the fibers you need. Volume within a reasonable amount is the thing that's going to give you the greatest sort of skewing towards muscle growth. That was a lot. I'm going to let you say words, ask for clarifications, do things.
Oh, I'm so excited. I know people are going to really like that because that was explained in a very digestible way, and I think oftentimes people will either fail to reach that kind of depth or they'll overcomplicate it and get overly nuanced in how that works. Thank you. Yeah, no, I really like how you explain that. Now, when we talk about what this actually looks like, because we can have it on paper and we can say, okay, effectively getting close to failure. What does that mean? The thing I like to encourage clients to seek, particularly when they're learning the skill of training close to failure. I always use the reference point of a decrease in velocity. So decrease in rep speed. You go down on the squat as you're coming back up. We don't need a sticking point, like true halt in velocity, but we want to see a decrease. And for some, if you played sports in high school, I mean, maybe you know what true failure is, you know what failing is. So great. Okay, you're already set up to be able to translate that exercise to exercise. For others who maybe they think lactic acid in a sick pump is failure, um, how would you go about teaching that skill of helping them understand, okay, this is what we're aiming for? um, would you overshoot? I guess I won't throw too many questions at you at once, but would you overshoot and be like, hey, no, I want to see you fail? Because like once we establish that, then we can work backwards.
Yeah, it's an interesting sort of web of issues that arise for really any client. I made a post on my story lately because someone asked me best rep range, and I was like 10 to 15 because all of you, me, you, Corey, me, and everyone reading and listening, no one is as good at exercise as they think they are. And that's truly why, like, a middle range rep range, something that will help you retain quality of movement. Like, you're not going to have a breakdown of something before the muscle tissue you're targeting. Say it's a quad extension, say it's a leg press, say it's a squat. Those are very different in terms of what could interfere with the tissue you're targeting. Um, no one is as good as they think. So having some semblance of calibration for A, what does it feel like when this hits failure genuinely, like only this tissue, but B, giving yourself a calibration for if it isn't something super isolative, if it is more of an integrated compound exercise, what is going to be the failure point of the exercise itself? Because it might be something before the actual, in say a squat pattern, it could be your brace before it's your quads. And so having a calibration that you can build off of from there is very, very helpful. So taking things to failure, someone being a cat is trying to break into my room. Um, Sidebar, we had to get I have a 6-month-old. We had to get baby locks on our doors for my cat well in advance of this kid being born. But it circles back to another point regarding the ultra high repetition sets and why they work versus why they might be more difficult. Anything within striking distance of failure is going to be beneficial for you. Striking distance in some of the literature could be as far as 5 or more reps. Again, probably try to skew people, encourage honestly almost absolute failure, because most of the time people won't actually get there because they don't have this calibration we're speaking to. But the ultra high sets, the higher the repetition count, the harder it is to be sure that you're close to real failure, because you made mention of the word like sort of metabolic stress or the lactic acid buildup. Those kind of things are very sensationally challenging. They feel like everything's going to shit. Your technique might be breaking down. It may be psychologically distracting, but is the velocity of the repetition truly slowing down, or are you just in pain? And by pain, I mean lactate pain, not, oh my God, I just snapped a tendon pain. Two very, very different scenarios. So to bring it all together again, having calibration for the exercise itself. And usually what that will look like is the first, like, this is going to on a be a per coach kind of basis, but making sure you have taught the skill of the exercise at least a little bit. And then for you as a coach, seeing this person take uncoached, they're going to do it on their own, take it to failure in air quotes, or what they believe to be failure on the first few weeks. Give them a week or two to get that neurological patterning down as best they can, have their concept of the exercise, but then have them take it to the wall, or what their perception of failure is, because that's data for you as a coach. It's going to let you know where they are psychologically and in tune with what true failure on the exercise and on the muscle group happens to be, because it could be bang on or it could be far away. And that's data for you to build off of to either encourage or give constraints to force them closer to failure. Or it could be data for something like those compound exercises where it lets you, again, as the coach, know, okay, they start to wilt under this RDL well before their bar speed would slow down from hamstring or glute strength or endurance. That's a factor for me to consider as well.
I love that. I think that kind of ties into my next one, which I would be shocked if this isn't on your list as well, but that would be exercise selection. And I mean, you kind of touched on that, like how different exercises are taxonomized in our realm in the bikini world as how much glute activation and glute growth can we get, which I can understand, sure, with specificity, it's important. But I think what's oftentimes missed is what's needed from a skill standpoint, but also from an SFR standpoint. So fatigue. Is this something that's worth taking to 15 plus reps? And I think often it's, at least from what I see and what I hear from other coaches programming and I guess programs, is that it's a matter of squeezing in, like just packing as much volume into a workout that the client can tolerate, and picking these exercises, but also ordering them in this fashion that, I mean, it just doesn't make sense. Like, I mean, there's just not a lot of intention there. Thoughts?
Yeah, I definitely had pattern redundancy, exercise selection, things like that were all on my list as well. So it's a big one. And it's because like in the fitness space broadly, there's a lot of this happening. In the bikini space specifically, there is, which is tragic because pattern redundancy. So we're talking things like, okay, we're going to do rear foot elevated split squats and walking lunges and maybe even a step up in the same day. And don't get me wrong, some of those are going to be, if you want to get super snotty and be like, oh, this is a mid range versus a shortened position exercise, or whatever, all the things that are super trendy for people to try to like sprinkle on top of their Instagram posts as though they know what it means. If you want to go that deep, yeah, sure, you can make some distinguishing characteristics between them, but it's a split squat, it's a lunge, it's a step up, it's a single leg knee bend, hip bend that the glute and the quad are going to be the primary movers on, and you just did 3 of them within the same workout when it could have been one split squat variation. It could have been a bilateral loaded, maybe leg press, hack squat. It could have been a RDL. It could have been a hip thrust or a glute bridge. You could have had all these different things that you could be a little bit more specific with. Yes, there's the action, there's origin to insertion, contracting of a muscle to really target specific things you're trying to grow. But then there's all the other benefits to what, even in the bodybuilding space, actually specifically in the bodybuilding space, are these nitty gritty little details of secondary or even tertiary benefits of exercise that could help the person in performance. So split squats are a very easy example, just because rotation, anti-rotation, what you're supposed to do on stage. There's certain poses, there's certain things that are going to be extremely beneficial for not being a brick. I used that term earlier for one of my clients because they turned into a brick the extent to which they had muscle spasms and back issues and got laid out on the floor one time. But also, if you have to do any sort of rotational work on stage, that's kind of something to consider within the program. So if we have so much pattern redundancy and overloading the same positions over and over, slowly but surely, you're going to need, cupping. You need what's the hand drill
Uh-huh.
hand drill lacrosse ball deal,
Oh,
whatever that is again.
the Theragun, yeah.
With the Theragun, you're gonna need like
The
17 different
DeWalt, yeah.
modalities, yeah, to actually be able to move. Where we could be being very specific, say with a walking lunge or a Bulgarian split squat, where okay, toe forward, bias your torso rotation ever so slightly to help drive internal rotation of the hip. So we're definitely targeting the glute and the quad, but we're also very intentionally lining up this exercise to gain or retain full functionality of what our hip is supposed to do through external rotation, internal rotation means. Therefore, we may not turn into a brick later in the program when all the volume has to apparently go all the way up for you to be able to retain any sort of muscle semblance. Same goes with like using a step up period for that exact express purpose and removing maybe a Bulgarian split squat or being able to amend it as in a different direction for a different goal. But pattern overuse, pattern redundancy, that's a big one. Same, an easy one for lower body as well is we're going to do back squats into leg press into insert your favorite hack squat or pendulum squat all within the same day, which it sounds ridiculous because I've been in this industry for like 15 years or so, and it was a thing, and then it got super woke in the industry and oh my god, I know not to do that anymore. And then now it's still a thing. TikTok exists, so it's still a thing. And it is, right? And so you could be diversifying the exercise selection to have all these action oriented goals of just growing specific tissue, but also all these adjacent goals where it's body retention, movement retention, your ability to actually pose and move throughout life. But also the lowest hanging one is, you mentioned stimulus versus fatigue. So each exercise is going to be tagged with, it could be arbitrary, it could be personal, whatever you denote it with, but how much return on investment will this exercise give me from a muscular level versus how much will it fatigue me in terms of a global recovery, like days it takes to be able to train legs in this example, or how much will it tax the remainder of said workout that I'm currently in? If I do heavy back squats and then heavy RDLs, there's not a lot else you should be when you nail that RIR, that RPE. There's probably not a lot you're going to be able to do after the fact. So spreading things out or not having maybe a back squat into a leg press into a hack squat where you're just trashing yourself, it allows you to have a more diverse program because again, in the realm that we're speaking, the demographics we're speaking, people hate it, but kickbacks are sick. They have a very specific target and a very specific goal that doesn't develop the whole glute the way people really want it to or want to believe it to. But hey, there's some regional considerations there. So don't put the horse before the cart. Don't necessarily overwhelmingly go after that one first. Hit the big rocks, but also don't have your big rocks be so redundant and overwhelming that it even eliminates your ability to make gains off of those smaller movements.
Agreed. It's a lot, but I like it. I like it. It where my mind goes is when I did my consult last May. I had it was back squats, front squat, back squats into front squats, and I think like I was very much married to this idea of a certain specific working sets per training day. I was training legs lower 3 times a week, but with a heavy emphasis on glutes as opposed to leg development. Now, it wasn't until someone broke it down for me, I was like, okay, like these are all doing the same things. They're all so fatiguing. Like, and you're doing 4 sets. And I mean, like, you can do that, but do you feel like shit? I'm like, yeah, I do. Um, I think I think what oftentimes is overlooked is lowering the working sets, even if that's 2, even if that's like, hey, you know what, you can hit squats, you can hit RDLs, and I mean, like, depending on where you are and whether or not, from a dietary standpoint, you're actually able to recover from this. I mean, there could be indication to regress the modality. I mean, like, how can we produce that same stimulus while working working the same movement or same type of movement without burying you? Because I mean, ultimately, that does put the client in a position where they are more than likely going to be injured, particularly if they're going into a contest prep. And like in 2021, I tore my serratus, my from posing, and there's a lot of dysfunction. Probably a lot we could go into there on how that could have been avoided, but it it's not uncommon to see those significant injuries when someone is training at such a high volume, when their actual, I guess, function, their ability to work at that capacity is limited. Um, and they also just have they're overtrained, but they're also not functional. If I'm using functional correct in that regard. But on the redundancy, on the movement patterns, the next one I had was structuring movement patterns, and I don't even want to say lengthened or shortened, but like, I mean, the biggest one I see is like leading with the hip thrust. And I know you have some thoughts there. I know we both have some thoughts on that exercise that we saw, that atrocity yesterday.
Mhm.
um, but I guess I'm how would you explain to someone who's married to the idea, let's keep the hip thrust in. Okay, fine. They want to keep it in. I don't have a problem with that. I mean, I think it has a place. But they're like, no, like this is what I lead with. You know what? I end with RDLs. I end with some kind of squat pattern. What would be what would be the teaching moment there?
So, oh god, there's so much to unpack. Okay, all right, where do we want to go with this? Let's lead with fatigue sucks. Um, and peaking in bodybuilding is not the same as peaking in other sports, even powerlifting, because there's only so much you can recover from. And do you know what recovery actually is? It's growth of tissue back to baseline and then accruing more after the fact. So you have a super compensation curve where I beat the shit out of Corey in this workout. She had a baseline level of tissue and ability, and then we did the training session. Ideally, it was very like challenging, stimulating to the tissue. Sick. 2 3 days goes by. She's eating like a horse. She's got all of her protein in. She's sleeping 8 to 12 hours, whatever her body typically needs, and then she's able to do it again with some form of progressive overload. Sweet. That's the cycle over and over and over. Peaking is body composition and energy balance over a longer period of time to make sure that you can retain the tissue that you've earned and minimize the body fat and or anything else to the extent to which it's going to be stage ready. Your body doesn't just all of a sudden come out of a training block and peak and just manifest magical new tissue the same way in, say, powerlifting, when you alleviate the fatigue during after the peak, during the taper, all of a sudden your nervous system is able to fully recover and you manifest quote unquote strength that was always kind of there. You just pounded it into the ground using training methods to try to super compensate even higher. That's a thing. Sports performance is a thing. Muscle accrual, there's only so much tissue that grows in a singular, from any singular workout, but even any training block. So peaking in that respect is a very distinct experience that I think people will unnecessarily pound themselves into the ground with this misconception of what a peak or what that kind of thing actually is. So circling back now to how to implement something, this is all leading towards the idea of fatigue sucks. And here's how fatigue works. You have one gas tank in each training session, maybe even in your microcycle. We'll spread it out all the way to the microcycle, the week, or your training week. The second sort of helpful image that I constructed for the course that I run is you have this scale. There's scale and there's a bucket on the scale. And then you have a bucket and you're pouring sand into said bucket. That is, you're pouring gains into your session, right? Stay with me now. You're pouring gains. And so as the scale goes up, because more sand has entered the bucket that you care about, stimulation, slowly but surely, there's actually a hole in the back of the bucket that you're pouring from. And sand is slowly seeping out of that as well. That's fatigue. You have a full bucket worth of gains you're able to put on the workout every single time, assuming you just hit it and hit it right. But every single thing that you do as you're pouring, some stimulation is being lost through the fatigue that you're accruing. That means absolutely every single workout, if you're doing redundant patterns, if you're doing ultra high repetitions, things that aren't hitting that strike zone of stimulation towards the end of the set, you're still accruing that slow leak of fatigue that's going to undercut the remainder of your session without necessarily getting appreciable stimulation. So every choice you make should be designed around the fact that, how do I maximize my return on investment here? A hip thrust, to bring it back to the question at hand, it contracts the glutes, ideally only contracts the glutes, and uses an isometric hold for the quads and everything else. That's usually not how it works. For those that haven't ever conceptualized it like this, the hip thrust is effectively just a RDL when you're lying down. The problem is that a standing RDL, an RDL, helps to facilitate you into the positions that will maximally advantage the glutes to do hip extension, to do like prime mover, origin to insertion contraction. And that's because what happens at the rib cage, at your torso, your core engagement, has a big impact. This being both the RDL and the hip thrust being compound movements. What happens at the rib cage, what happens at your torso, how you're hyperextending or not, anterior pelvic tilt, whichever term you prefer, that has an impact on how much your glutes can be used as a prime mover versus a secondary stabilizer of the pelvis and maybe even the low spine, like the core itself. If we put you in a hyperextended posture, say your RDL, a lot of people RDL with a hyperextended posture, all of a sudden the abdominals themselves have been stretched into a position of slightly less advantage. They're not as strong necessarily when they're stretched out slightly more, which means that as they fatigue out, probably more rapid because they're in a weaker position, something else has to hold you in the position you're trying to hold yourself in. So this stability gets dumped into other muscles, typically the adductors or the glutes, to help stabilize your spine so that you can continue to do the exercise at hand. The RDL, like I was referring to, because it's a low reach, like the bars in your hands lower, it's helping to stack your rib cage over your pelvis, put you in a proper braced position so that when you actually perform them, don't get me wrong, you can overround and you can fuck this up too. But it's assisting this major issue that, whereas in the RDL, excuse me, when you're in the hip thrust position, you're on your back, you have a bar placed on your hips, and because of the direction of gravity and where the load has been placed, it's actually promoting you losing that rib cage over pelvis and true core brace stack, meaning that you're actually encouraging the glutes to have a more challenging time to actually be used as the prime mover and get all the stimulation you're moving towards. Does this mean that it's doing nothing? No, that's a dumb take. And I hate when people go into absolutist terminology like that. They're definitely still doing stuff for you and you're going to see gains, but it's way easier to use them at the beginning, at the end, probably mid to high rep range, something that your core brace can actually withstand so you can stay locked in that true position and go through every single repetition of your hip thrust as though it was an RDL. You're hinging just in a different position. Now, if it's a shortened position exercise, if we're going to get super duper ultra mega stupid fancy with it, yeah, I can also say that in a shortened position, the muscle itself is weaker. So not only is gravity and the bar placement from a structural standpoint encouraging you to have a more difficult time to harness the glutes properly as the prime mover, they're also weaker towards lockout. And there's some data out there allegedly that states that the glutes are a unique muscle where they have leverage points that makes them actually stronger towards the shortened position. That doesn't matter, because like it does matter, but it doesn't matter as much to me because you're still going to have to face the fact that gravity and the bar placement is promoting you losing your stacked rib cage. So altogether, this doesn't mean don't do it. It means probably load it in a 10 to 12 to 15 rep range, maybe use some tempo, use constraints of modest repetition to high repetition, use tempo, use contraction based pauses. So like fully locked out pauses, do things that will help with quality assurance so that if you're going to invest the amount of fatigue necessary to use this exercise in your program, for the love of God, you're at least maximizing the return on it. Because otherwise, you'd be getting a garbage stimulation for the hamstrings and the quads, as they everyone and their mother has felt their quads or their hamstrings or their low back during a hip thrust. They're always on in some capacity isometrically, but now they're doing a little bit more than you would want. So choose a load selection and constraints that will allow you to most effectively harness your glutes, get them as close to failure as you can before moving on to things that are not just a garbage RDL. There.
I've seen in video when I'm looking at clients' forms, and it's one of those things like you can ultimately like you can correct, and if they're married to the idea that hey, this needs to be at a certain place in my programming, at the very least, I really want to see if we're leading with this, it needs to be done correctly. And I mean, stacking the rib cage over the pelvis, that is, I would say, the more common mistake that I see. You typically get this very saggy lower back, this overreaching outside of, what we could say is active range of motion. You're just reaching for inches there. You are hitting it, but there's not a lot of tension actually being held on the way down, which ironically is the point of the movement, that we would want to have tension. So it's like now you're accruing fatigue. You're probably doing higher rep, chasing some semblance of a pump, um, but what are you really getting out of it? So I mean, my programming when I was under John, like, I mean, I was doing hip thrusts 3 times a week. Sure, I saw some growth because I wasn't in a deficit and I was training intensely, but um, making that switch and tailoring it so that it was it was ordered more appropriately, relative within a workout, always towards the later half. um I mean, like, that's been a huge game changer for my own personal growth. And I mean, oh, ironically, I was also starting all my workouts with some kind of RDL. I i think that's one of the key components, at least right now, that I don't want to say needs to be hammered, but I just think there's this wave of coaches who kind of put it out. Okay, you want glutes, like, all right, we need to hip thrust, we need a glute bridge, we need to, do um, re- all of these redundant movements without really considering, okay, what is the skill of the client? Like, I can tell them train to failure, but ultimately stimulus is not always failure, and the amount of volume needed to create that, it's gonna come at a cost.
Yeah, it kind of ties a lot of the offshoot topics we've spun off together, but I think frequency is another thing that you mentioned in previous programming, training glutes or training legs and glutes in some capacity 3 days per week. And then we've touched on, what is an effective set, what is an effective workout, exercise order plays a role, fatigue accumulates and runs in front of actual stimulation on the day, but could also carry over into other sessions, things like that. This isn't to say as well for those listening that the fatigue monster is coming to eat your lunch and you're going to make no gains ever again, but like it's just making sure that you can get the most effective workouts in. To close the loop too, honestly, because again, I hate just being like, everything you do sucks, don't do it. But okay, if you're going to line up your glute bridge or your hip thrust first, again, mid to high reps, get as close to failure as you possibly can. Choose a load that isn't going to cause your core to break first, and you feel it on feel. I said feel. Feel is a banned term on the internet. You're not supposed to train to feelings because feelings are bad. Make sure you feel your glutes, because you know what a pump is? A pump is directed blood flow telling you that the muscle that you were hoping to target was actually targeted. And you know what it also does? It raises proprioception. And proprioception is your body awareness of where you are in space. That can then carry forward into something more meaningful for absolute hypertrophy, like a squat pattern, like a hinge pattern. So if you're going to use it first, shortened position exercises, I actually use them quite a lot in this respect, are great potentiation exercises. High cable biceps curl is a shortened biceps exercise. It's typically less loadable than, say, a preacher curl. But if I suck at, which is embarrassing because I suck at training my arms, I suck at getting a good connection to my biceps. I started doing a high cable biceps curl or a preacher curl, like a machine version, where I just hiked the seat all the way down. So I was in the similar position, got a insane pump before I would go and do more of a mid range or more of a loadable exercise. And then that one, skill wise, shot through the roof. All of a sudden, I'm making better gains, with the idea being slowly peel back that first movement pattern as you get better at doing the thing that actually makes the bigger difference. Same as sprinkle the gains at the end of your workout. Do the sets of 10 to 12 to 15, whatever it is at the end. Be respectful of the rest of the work you've already done that day. Maybe do 2 sets. Don't just like hammer yourself into the earth so you can actually recover, because a lot of the work has already been done. Okay. Um, what did we just say we were going to get into before I just closed that loop? Frequency. Cool.
Frequency.
As I have reluctantly started to look at competitor programming, I honestly, in good faith, I can't see too many good programs escaping 4 or so days per week. And that's a statement about the experience level of the competitor, how many of those moving parts that we've talked about already, movement quality, programming considerations, ability to actually elicit true high intensity sets, their lifestyle and actual recoverability, like them handling their sleep and their nutrition. If a lot of those things are starting to get more and more dialed in, I can't imagine a training block beyond, or excuse me, a training program beyond 4 days per week that wouldn't almost immediately start to have bleeding over effects into the next week. Like training legs 3 days per week, unless I'm like, okay, this day we're doing 1 set of this, 1 set of this, 2 sets of this, and then you're training like shoulders or something like that, like a hybrid sort of day, maybe. But in looking at it, like if I get you to the point where, and this is a point that you sort of touched on in passing earlier, but okay, you get 2 sets on your leg press. And a lot of people will be like, that's not enough volume. And I'd be like, that's perfect amount of volume if you try. Because if you try and you actually get to the point of failure truly on both of those sets, 8 to 10 to 12 reps, hey man, maybe you just got to calibrate your proximity to failure and what it truly feels like, but it will be enough, especially with the remainder of the workout that's to come. So these are all those things. Like if you get a client to that standpoint where 2 sets isn't a punishment, 2 sets is a gift, where it's like, you're so good at this that if I gave you more than two, you would overkill it. I can't see frequency of higher than 4 days per week being something that's really feasible for an experienced competitor.
I honestly, dude, I can't imagine that. Like, I mean, even 3 days a week at right now, going through my first fat loss phase on this kind of program, my working sets are like 13 to 16 maybe. And 16 is like, well, it's kickbacks. Like, come on. Like
Yeah.
we're not talking about um we're not talking about the same volume equated for the sessions earlier in the week. It's hard. Like I fucking feel it. Like this week it's starting to catch up with me and it's giving me insight into what kind of changes I should look to make as I get leaner, as I get closer to potentially a show, whether that's now or in the future. But the adjustment from going from training 25 working sets a workout. I mean, like I think once we hit past like 18, it's like, okay, like are the quality of these sets? Are you actually able to recover from them? Is this for muscle retention? Is this for muscle growth? Because why aren't we able to get it done in less work? And I mean, for listeners, if they've followed me over the last year and a half, like my mindset around this has completely shifted. I mean, you tell me last year, last January, like, oh, hey, like you're going to actually see more growth out of sub 16 sets a workout, but you're also going to be able to train 3 days a week. You're going to be able to recover from that 3 days a week, three lower, one or two upper. But I mean, even then it's like, it's muscle retention at that point. Like I'm not necessarily trying to facilitate the same kind of growth in my upper body. So that kind of programming I think works if the priority is lower body. If you're taking someone who truly needs muscle like head to toe and they're underdeveloped, you're you're going to have to divvy up that volume. And I think training lower 3 days a week, even if you're like pulling punches when it comes to direct quad work, direct hamstring work, it's like it's costing you somewhere. And I think that's where the intentionality and I guess specificity with the program design needs to be respected, but not overly emphasized. And that was another one of mine is not not avoiding certain movements for the sake of, oh yeah, I don't want to stimulate my quads, I don't want to grow my quads, I don't want to grow my hamstrings. It's okay, you'll learn. That's like the big thing, you'll hear that like 1,000 times. I won't do this client won't do split squats because she doesn't like that there's any kind of stimulus in her quads. I won't do any kind of reverse hack, any kind of leg press, because no, there's no acceptance of quad stimulation. um, how would you how would you approach that? How I I have my way, your way is going to sound nicer and much more logical, but yeah.
I mean, is it though? Like, because a certain extent, okay. Like, do people approach you for your expertise and your advice, or do they approach you to just basically be enabled with what they previously thought to begin with? So that's a big screening criteria for, like, that's a
Mm,
flag to me. And that's a conversation to be had, like an open, candid, respectful conversation. Like, listen, I can educate you on all the things, on how much it takes to actually grow and how much muscle can grow. Period. Like, there's the idea of like an actual structured isolation exercise. How, if one exercise equals one growth for this muscle, and if it's a compound exercise, is like maybe half towards my quad, like that kind of, like trying to math it out, stuff like that. But truly, to me, it's like I can accommodate people to a certain extent, but beyond a certain extent, when it becomes an impossibility, that's just not a client that is going to see success with me or anyone else. Really, like the fear over a split squat, which is probably one that, as you raised with your example, is probably fairly prominent, because we could use the example like quad extensions, which I have in someone's program right now, because, oh, look at that, there's a previous ACL injury that I would like to keep nice and happy. So there's other rationale for it, but quad extensions, I can only assume, would be like a forbidden exercise for a ton of people, because there's no other muscle that's going to be involved in this at all. It's just all quads. Yeah, to me, it's like it's a conversation piece, and like I can go down like the tap dance around it, see what we can do in terms of like, let's alter your foot placement, let's make this more of a hinge style of a, let's bias this, bias that, which is a thing. Regional hypertrophy, sweet, let's go. But at a certain point in time, grow the muscle, see where it all teases itself out, because the biggest bang for your buck exercises are still going to be like the biggest bang for your buck exercises for your glutes, unfortunately, are going to be really good for your quads too. And at a certain point of time, you're going to need to just grow globally. And if I've learned anything from you, it's you need to grow a shitload more than you really think you need or want to, such that when you actually cut down, you have the tissue retention, first of all, but also a lot more body fat than people perceive is on them probably at all times. So a lot of the shape that they have, is it muscle or is it the combination of muscle and body fat distribution? Once you get to that stage, yo, you can, like, yeah, remove them. Fuck off the quad extensions. Cool. Like, do more hinge dominance than knee bend dominance, whatever. But establishing that base is almost, it would be, in my opinion, like a prerequisite. And if those conversation pieces, if that level of maturity of a competitor can't be found, then I wish you the best of luck. And I hope you don't find someone that enables you. But I also hope that you're happy with your physique and your training. And then that is like, there's a certain standard of quality, and I think you raised this in DMs with me before, where it's like you hold yourself to a certain standard, and there's certain things that hopefully will slowly die off in this area of the industry where, you know, I mean, judging criteria, it sucks. It's judging criteria. You have to sort of be tailored around it, sort of, but the misconceptions around how growth and retention work, that's the bigger problem.
completely agree. I think on that note, on judging criteria, because this is something that we discussed couple weeks back with building out, okay, yes, like she needs more glutes. It's also relative to that individual's structure. I mean, across the board, almost every person is going to need more glutes. But I mean, you ever look at someone clavicularly, like looking at how broad they are? You take someone who doesn't have a lot of delt to begin with, but they're just built that way. Like they have a small waist, they have broad shoulders. Okay, you're going to need a shitload more glutes to catch up to that versus someone who's a little more narrow, who maybe up top. I mean, like I always refer to an otter. I'm like, oh, you're built like an otter. Like it's just like slopes. It's like neck, okay, straight into, yeah. It's one of those things like the judging criteria, yes, it's subjective, but it still comes down to if you have a very small waist, you have more room to play with. If you don't, then it's going to require more tissue than you likely think you need. But I think even for those who are advantaged and might not have as far to go, I still err on the side of like, well, let's not chance it. Like, I mean, if it's one of the most overused phrases that I hear with inquiries, and it's I don't I don't say that like to shit on people. I know I've said this as well plenty of times that like you just don't have as much as you think you do. And if we were to really strip you down, like you're going to find that like, hey, it's going to take a lot of compensation either with posing or with conditioning, which is the other offshoot to this is okay, well, you might have the muscle up top, but if you're then having to compensate by getting too conditioned, well, now you've exceeded the judging criteria. Now you've gone too far, and you're gonna. If you don't get docked down for it now, you will eventually. So then it's like looking long term enough, far enough ahead, I guess, to assume like it still comes back to the same answer. You don't have enough muscle, and it doesn't mean like build out every muscle group equally, but hey, you fucking build your quads out just a little bit more. And I promise what you're going to get from like just surrendering to that squat pattern, like it's going to pay off in the glute department. Like you're going to get the projection. Otherwise, you're going to be subject to all of these means of just trying to circumvent uh, fixing the training. And I just talked about this. I know the last two episodes, people might be sick of it. They seem to really like the training stuff, which is really, I mean, that's why I wanted to have you, an expert, to come talk about this because a lot of people I think are kind of waking up to this idea. Wow, like I'm paying this coach for coaching. Part of that, like a third of what I'm paying for, I'm not even getting. I'm getting sent a training split and told to train to failure, and then they look at how I look, they see how I look in check-ins. Okay, cool, keep doing what you're doing. Amazing. And then that's it. That's the extent of programming. Um, I hate that. That was me. I was in that position. And it's like, I can't be doing everything right. I promise you, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm guessing my way through this. And like, if it was represented in my physique, it would not look the way it does. I think that causal relationship that people make with the high volume training and specifically the supersets, that was another one of mine too, is there's just so much to unpack. It's like I've told you a
I'll feel
thousand
this.
times.
I'll feel the fucking high volume shit. Okay. Again, close loop on the previous one. Quads. If I were to lay the hammer on it, period, it's way harder to grow tissue, which I hope the audience that you have, they've grown some tissue before. They know it's really hard. So if quads for anyone's clients, even you, a little bit like neurotic about, oh my God, my quads versus everything else, remember, it's super hard to grow, super easy to lose. So if you needed that real quick programming swap for like, I don't know, the magnitude of a month or two, you could probably fader down the quads and see them like vanish just a little bit in relativity to if you had to bring them up. It's always harder to bring something up than it is to lose it in post. Sets 25, supersets, all that kind of stuff. Two real thought processes on this. We spoke about effective sets, effective repetitions, things that are going to be the most stimulating. The way I describe it in the hypertrophy course that I run is there's more load induced strategies and there's more accumulation induced strategies. Some are going to be more applicable to different skill levels, different exercise selections, different implements. But basically, the idea here is that if we go on a more load induced means, we're able to get better motor unit recruitment with less repetitions because there's just more necessity by virtue of the weight. So something like a machine press, say shoulder press, chest press, a leg press, things like that are pretty stabilized for you. And it's just get on it and push. There's more to it, but get on it and push. You can probably fail ish at like 8 and be pretty clean, pretty good. So you don't necessarily need to be hauling ass for like sets of 25 on a leg press, because that's for an exercise that's way more difficult or has more moving parts for you to control to retain the quality of movement. The quality of movement is probably one of the most paramount things that a coach can help you develop, because it's going to have the greatest impact on your ability to actually see a return on investment on any program. So more accumulation based strategies, the sets of, 10, 12, 15, sometimes 20, they're going to be very effective or more effective, assuming both of those scenarios get you close enough to failure to be stimulating. That's the caveat. It has to be close enough. They'll be very effective, but it's more of a strategic choice based upon what the exercise demands. The implement could be more unstable. It could be a dumbbell or a barbell for certain muscle groups. It could be a very fine tuned, precise range of motion, a very regional consideration. So, kickbacks, you can definitely angle it subtly to sort of over the next 3 years. If you did it exactly the same way, see some appreciable gains in that one area of your glute. But things like that, the higher volume, because more weight would encourage more technical breakdown faster for a more complex exercise, you can be strategic and choose sets of 12, 15, something like that. They're less loaded, absolutely, but allow you to control the movement a little bit easier. The key factor is both scenarios need to get to failure. 4 by 25, you just did 2.5 sets of probably pre-fatigue accumulation before you started to get even remotely close to truly close to failure repetitions. It felt really hard, but that's where we had to tag it with something more calibrated. Like, did the reps slow down? Could you actually complete this repetition fully, or did you start to squeak it out towards the end? So ultra high reps also works, but it's because you had to do so many repetitions. It's like the first 2.5 to 3 sets were basically setting the stage for one set to actually give you a few repetitions that might have been effective. So, exercise execution, to circle back to the other prong of the discussion, if it's not standard of practice for basically the entire industry, I feel like that's the actual thing that you're paying for, period. Because a spreadsheet or a program, if I haven't said it enough times already within this talk, everything works if you try hard enough. It's more, can you execute? Can you get something from your coach? So could it be guidance in terms of dieting, the actual cutting protocols, or anything that Corey specifically, without saying the actual word, because we want to stay on the YouTube. That's an inside joke. Uh, drug protocols, everybody. If they can help you with something like that, whatever, outside of my scope, whatever. Or can they actually help you refine your exercise execution? There's got to be something that's not just the piece of paper and go try real hard. Something standard of practice needs to be elevated, if it hasn't already, to be like, what I do is you'll get massive amounts of refinement of your technique, because heaven forbid I just give you a piece of paper and tell you to try real hard, and then it doesn't go very well, and then what am I going to do? Gaslight you and say it's your fault? Like, no, you hired a coach and you got a program. So that to me is like, that should be almost standard of practice.
I love that you're also of the belief like clients need to advocate for themselves, and it's not news to me. Like, I mean, it's one of the things that um, we've shared, and we do share with coaching, but as clients, you should advocate for the service that you're getting. And if it's not the service that you want, and that's different than what was laid out, well, that's okay. Like, identify where the gap is. And if it's not something the coach can work with, it might be worth considering a different coach, might be worth going to someone who can meet those needs. But um, I know we hit on a lot today, and I hope listeners were able to take away. Um, really, like, there's a ton of value that even like you highlighted for me, for myself, and like as a coach, that's something that this is really the next progression where I see my own learning, where it does need to be refined. Because I mean, there are individuals who are asking me hard questions, and I'm like, fuck, like I need to not just be able to understand this, I need to be able to explain it better and anticipate these questions before they're actually asked. So I super grateful for you to come on and do this. Like, honored, truly. Guest listeners, y'all should be honored. This is Eric's. Yeah. I've been a part of the collective for maybe since August, July. I just lurk in there. Guys, Prescript Collective, it's like 35 bucks a month. Tons of value in there. There's also, I'm gonna let you do this because I don't know the details. Tell them about the lab and all the things.
Oh God. Okay. So the prescript. This is something that we didn't touch on in the resume. Uh, so I've been working with Prescript for a number of years now, and one of the things that we came out, I think it's got its second or third year anniversary now, top of this year, but it's called the Prescript Collective. It's effectively like our ongoing education for the ongoing education that we already provide. It's got a Discord server with a ton of different channels and topics for basically having community based discussions. Sometimes the coaches themselves will jump in if I tag them, but I basically am the overseer. I'm the babysitter of the entire process. I am omnipresent at all times. But we run Prescript Collective exclusive labs. The major one that I am involved in currently is called the Technique Lab. And effectively, between my online coaching service that I do myself with video analysis and stuff like that, and the Technique Lab, we effectively have members of the collective submit voluntarily their own training footage for us to use as educational content during said lab. The lab is simply a Zoom call, the same way if you've gone through like a university course, you did biology and you did a wet lab and you got to do dissections. It's just an hour. Some of them are Q&A style. This one is effectively, let's put up a video on screen and as a group collectively sort of dissect what we see, coaching cues, sort of warm ups, or things that could be beneficial to improving movement quality, anything like that. And so, between the two things that I've been doing for a number of years now, the amount of videos of people moving that I've seen is ungodly. And that's why I really lean to the fact that that's the true value of any service is how can they improve someone's quality of movement.
I honestly, I think a lot of my clientele, the ones who are getting into the coaching realm, whether they have the time or the means interest to go through the full course, I still think being a part of the collective and it just exposing themselves to another component of learning in this setting. Because I mean, like I've gone back and I've watched now dozens of the labs, and I mean, like there are a lot of things that you and Kyle as well, like you'll both like kind of pose like, hey, uh, why are what are y'all thinking, students? And that's something that I really like is like y'all don't just like give out answers. You're like, no, work for it. Like you have a brain, like, and if you've been through Prescript, then you can apply a lot of you should be able to apply a lot of what you have learned. But I think that's something listeners could benefit from. Of course, if you want to find Eric, you want to hit him up for personalized help, personalized coaching. I encourage that. I would like you guys to do that. I'd like you to follow him because his content on social media, if you're looking to further your education, like please give him a follow. Um, Instagram, what's the handle?
The handle on Instagram, which is basically the only thing that I have, and I can't believe you just said content creation, but at Eric Bugera, I'm sure it'll be in show notes or something like that. Just my name. That's basically it. I'm the dude wearing a Prescript shirt. There shouldn't be too many of us if you even remotely get the name right. The content, it's basically Q&A stories where if I get agitated enough, you get an entire novel worth of an answer. And then again, I write, and this is the thing is that if anybody takes anything from this, I want you to be able to look at your own program from your coach or your own programming for your clients and be able to dig like two or three layers deep as a justification for every choice that you make. And it's not to add anxiety or neuroticism overly so, but it's like that's the reason why people get results is okay, why did I take this choice? And so a lot of my posts are just basically me fleshing out my own ideas as to why things might be showing up in my own programming. It's in a roundabout way. It's like a written long form sort of discussion piece on Instagram. I don't anticipate anybody to read it all. It's just me yelling into the void. But that should be the real takeaway is why am I making the decisions that I am and how can I justify it? Because everything is right, everything is wrong. It all depends on what your choices are and what the rationale behind them actually are. So be principle derived and then train the person in front of you, and you should be miles ahead of most people in the industry.
Amazing, amazing. Thank you so much for doing this. Thank you for the time, guys. I hope you like this episode. As always, details below. Uh, I will see you in the next one.